Cocktail time.
My first assignment out of indoctrination school, first regular assignment, was to a small shipyard in Coconut Grove, Florida, which is a sort of a suburb of Miami, that was building aircraft rescue boats. These are smaller like PT boats, but they were specialized for running and for being located at airfields, which are mostly located near the coasts. And when their new pilots crashed in the water, they'd run out and get them and hopefully keep the plane afloat long enough to rescue it. Interesting part was that this was the shipyard that built PTs 1 and 2 for the Navy, their own design. Their own design proved to be not very good. These guys are used to building battleships and things. So that's when they started putting PT boats and similar boats out to private shipyards for building. And this particular outfit, which had built also in regular business, had been building yachts, decided to build their own PT boat, and they got a special designer for that, and became one of the more famous of those class of ships. This was a real assembly line job. They built about 20 a month, and they build them start them at one plant, float them down to the second plant, which is where I was, and get them outfitted and delivered from there. And we had the final inspection crew. My crew was an interesting conglomeration of people. They had all been old sea captains, fishermen, boat operators, and rum runners. Quite a few of them had run rum during the impression. And but they knew their small boats. Now these were guys who at that time were in their 50s. And when the war started, they'd all marched down to the recruiting offices and expected to be made at least lieutenant commanders. And the Navy said, no thank you. And so they were pretty mad at the Navy. The first Navy guy that went down there on that job was a young lieutenant, or ensign, just like I was, before me. And they hated him. They didn't cooperate with him. They didn't like him. Wouldn't hardly talk to him. So when they left and I came down, it started off the same way, you know. But it took a while, but I finally got them around where we were old buddies, and by acknowledging their expertise and my lack of same. But anyhow, I was in charge of the dadgun place, and so I ran it, and they were very helpful. We got to be very good friends. It was a fun place to be, because 3 times a week we would go out on these high-speed boats. They'd have a top speed of, some of them of as much as 60 miles an hour, and they'd give any of the PT boats, who were much bigger and more powerful, a run for their money. And we didn't get to run them, because they were being built by the boat shipyard, and it was their boat, and they were responsible for it, so we couldn't drive it. But a bunch of interesting things happened, different kinds of things. Well, for one thing, for a while I played on their, they had a little basketball team, a little league. I played on that for a while. I did a cartoon strip for them once a week for their weekly newspaper on the goings-on at the shipyard I was in with the Navy group. These were all caricatures of all the characters, and they enjoyed that. One day we got a call saying that there was a blimp down in the ocean, and could we do something about it? So together with the shipyard, and they said, yeah, they sent out a boat to find the blimp. Well, it turned out they couldn't find the blimp, which had apparently corrected its problems and got off again. Meanwhile, they found a couple of fishermen are out there adrift and lost, and they picked them up and brought them back. The boats we made were given to foreign countries mainly. Interestingly enough, all these were built on a Navy contract, but the Navy really didn't take hardly any of them. They weren't interested in small boats. They needed big boats, you know, big ships. So, like we would have Dutch came over. They would stay and watch the building of the ship, getting familiar with it, and they'd take it off down to the Dutch East Indies or somewhere, and they'd run it sort of as a submarine patrol boat. It could be fixed up with depth charge and torpedoes on the side, and they had a couple of twin mount machine guns on the deck. The Australians were always fun. Took their boats, and then sort of capped things all off. A couple of Russians, a captain and a commander, showed up for their boat. They want to build a couple of boats, all right. And to get to the United States, they just sailed across the Pacific Ocean, which was just furious actions going on in the war. Well, Russia wasn't at war with anybody in the Pacific. That's Japan. And so they just sailed across without any trouble at all. Of course, we weren't going to attack them. And but they were kind of interesting guys to talk to. They talked pretty good English. But the Navy watched them like a hawk, Navy intelligence. We were restricted strictly to that area. They could not visit the cove. They could not run. When we delivered the boat up to New York for shipment to Russia, they could not go on the boat themselves, even though it was going to be their boat. And but they were a good guy. I got Christmas cards from the captain later about that. And so there were a lot of interesting times, a lot of interesting people, and sometimes finally people would come back from the war and tell us about what they did with these. Incidentally, they were generally not the brightest and best for the Naval Graduate School. They got sent for the big ships. But we got some guys that sort of off the bottom of the class. They were hot dog guys mainly. And some of them were so busy, they'd zoom in for a landing on hard reverse, shutter up to the dock, and walk off in their whites to go or date or something. Well, once in a while, if the engine hiccuped a little bit doing this way, you'd take the dock out or part of it, and not do the ship any good either. So a lot of them didn't get out of Florida before they had some few troubles there. But some of them did, and they went to the war effort, and they had interesting things to report about supporting landings in Italy and places like that. But anyhow, this went on for about 10 months. And finally, I get word I'm going to be transferred up to New Jersey, or New York, first to New Jersey. And so as it happened, a friend of mine, one of the guys that worked for me, had to go pick up a sailboat he had delivered to one of these rich guys that were down there for the winter, and his family. And he asked if I wanted to go along, so I said yeah. So we went over, picked it up, and sailed back with the old guy. And he found out I was being transferred up to that area, and that was where he was from. And he was down there. In those days, you needed to have a gas ration in order to get gasoline, and he didn't have any. So he had a problem getting back. So he said, "Well, look, why don't you ride back with me and my family in my car?" He had two small, high-powered boys, and we'll take care of all the expenses, and you just have the tickets for the gas. So that sounded like a good idea. So I did. It took us 2 or 3 days to get up, and keeping the boys under control in the back seat. And so he said, well, why don't you come out to my house and just stay with us till you get settled. Meantime, I said, well, I sold my car. So it's all right, you can use our station wagon. So he lived out in Germantown. It's a fancy part of town. And so I stayed there first, signed up, drove the car into Philadelphia every day, and until I got set up. And we became good friends. We were one of the family. I was, and in fact, he had one of his buddies. This guy was a really rich guy. He owned a huge fleet of barges that moved coal and everything all over that region, and he knew all the people and politics and all that stuff. And he had a big buddy of his who was visiting him, and he wanted him to meet me. Maybe have a job for him or something after the war. Well, it turns out I was out on a trial that day, and we didn't get in until 10, 11 o'clock at night, so that never happened. But anyhow, we were good friends, and after I was out of the Navy and got married and everything else, I went back to see him one time and stayed overnight with him again. And so that was the end of the Miami story. We had a couple of other interesting things happen there while I was there. One, I did go out on submarine patrol with a blimp one day over the Caribbean. The blimps were used a lot in World War II to hunt submarines because they're slow moving and they can really see down into the water. And it was amazing. Over the Mediterranean or Caribbean, you could see every sponge on the bottom of the ocean, and everything is any size moving in it. And so we were out there looking for submarines. So I asked them, well, what do we do if we find one? And they said, well, we call for help. That we don't try to. Any submarine has at least a 5-inch gun on it, and so we don't tangle with that because all we had was one little twin mount 30 caliber machine gun in the nose. That guy sat next to the bar. And then the seating area in the back, which had some swivel chairs and things. And mounted on the wall was a few rifles. And in the hole we carried one 500-pound bomb. And if we caught them on the surface, refueling or doing something, we would do that. But mercifully, we didn't find any submarines. But they're out there for as long as there's daylight, and then you come back. And then just to show off, they opened it up coming down the highway, and we were going 70 miles an hour, wide open. And till we got back to the naval base, and a blimp is obviously lighter than air, with all the gas in it, or just a little bit. And to trim it, give it trim up or down, it had airbags front and aft. And if you wanted to pump air into the front one, it would give it a little tilt down. So if you wanted to come in for a landing, otherwise you'd have a hard time getting down. And then you'd have to drive it down with your engines. And you drop the ropes, and some people grab it and haul you down. Taking off is the reverse, of course, you pump the air out. Those were kind of fun and different experiences. I also, one time, went out on a training mission with the PT boats to attack merchant shipping. So they had stationed out there a merchant ship, and we didn't know, I think we were not allowed, but the rule of the game was that they couldn't use their radar because the Japanese didn't, so we didn't need to worry about that. So in the early evening, when the moon's up behind them, we threw the thing, put the ship into its underwater exhaust mode, so it'd be quiet, and we'd sneak up from the dark side, so the moon was not behind us, behind the ship. Sneak, 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 sneak. And if they saw us, they were going to turn on the flashlights on us, or the searchlights. But we got in there, when we got into the torpedo range then, we let loose the torpedo, the dummy in this case, it's that deep, and we would then quickly go to take it off underwater exhaust to above water, which gives you more power, turn on the smoke generator, and zip home on behind the smoke screen, just like that, full blast all the way. So it was a nice fun day, water, and so it was a fun time. I also had one of my first major girlfriends there, who was a wave of Navy, and was in intelligence, and so we had a good time, and in fact, during the debate, she had her ears open to hear some conversation that had really to do with drug trafficking. So she got that reported and ended that little problem. But anyhow, it was a good time. But it did come to an end in about 10 months, and I was on to the next thing. End of story. That story.